Great. Alrighty, we'll go ahead and get started. Welcome and good evening. My name is Nina Olivier. I am one of the event coordinators and program coordinators for the Northwest EcoBuilding Guild. We are a nonprofit dedicated to the green education surrounding our built environment. So we're excited to welcome you all tonight. This is one of the many programs we put on here at the Northwest EcoBuilding Guild. And these are part of our monthly education green building series. So welcome. I am muting you all as you're coming into tonight's education training. So if you can during the presentations to please keep your microphones muted, that will help any sort of background disturbance or noise. That will be really great. And then this event is being recorded. So if you do have to pop off early, please know if you registered via Eventbrite, we'll provide you all a link to the recording about a week out after. And it will also be readily available for any Northwest EcoBuilding Guild members. We have a great member-only content access page to previous webinars and training. So welcome all, and please feel free to ask questions and introduce yourself in the chat. Let us know where you're from, your organization that you are representing this evening. Also, if you have any questions too regarding the 2021 Washington State Energy Code training, that can help guide our discussion following our speaker presentation. So before we get into the weeds of things tonight, I'd like to pause and provide a land acknowledgement. The Northwest EcoBuilding Guild acknowledges that we work on the unceded traditional land of the Coast Salish peoples, specifically the first people of Seattle, the Duwamish people, original stewards of the land past and present. We honor with gratitude the land itself and the Duwamish tribe. I will post in the chat a local resource and organization called Real Rent. You can do something today to stand in solidarity with the first peoples of this land by paying real rent. All funds go directly to the Duwamish Tribal Services Network to support the revival of the Duwamish culture and the vitality of the Duwamish tribe. We welcome you all to learn about the traditional Indigenous lands you live on by visiting the Native Lands website, which I will also post in the chat later this evening. Wonderful. So again, welcome. This event is being recorded, and a recording of this event will be made available to all registrants and Northwest EcoBuilding Guild members about a week after today. Please keep your microphones muted during the presentations. As I mentioned, there will be time after the presentation for questions and an in-depth discussion. Again, we welcome you all to post in the chat who you are, where you're from, and perhaps the organization you're representing today, and any questions for the speaker tonight. If you have any specific logistical questions or challenges, I'll post my email and phone number in the chat, and please feel free to reach out and I can try and help you connect to the webinar again. Great. I'd like to thank our sponsor this evening's 475 High Performance Building Supply. 475 has a passion for building science and sustainable material use and passive house certification for protecting the environment and making the world a better place. 475's mission is to supply essential materials, building components, and knowledge that will lead the transformation of the North American construction industry toward making durable, high-performance passive house and zero-energy buildings. They excel because they offer best-in-class products with highly specialized focus through peer-to-peer communication and have launched a business-to-business interface. They deliver products in a timely manner from centrally located warehouses here in the PNW and through stocking lumber yards regionally. We'd like to thank High Performance Building Supply and check them out for your next building project, whether it be a new building or retrofit, residential or commercial, passive house, or just a very durable and comfortable building. They look forward to working with you. We'd also like to thank King County Green Tools for sponsoring tonight's event. King County Green Tools is a longtime Guild member and program supporter. They are designed to help all King County stakeholders green their built environment. while addressing critical environmental issues such as global warming, habitat restoration, solid waste management and reduction, and community planning. Green Tools provides technical assistance, hands-on training, and policy development through partnerships in public and private sectors. Be sure to check out their documents and links pages for resources on a variety of green building topics. I'll post both Green Tools and 475 high performance building supplies links in the chat so you all can learn more. Just some fun upcoming Guild events, as well as further educational opportunities. On June 28th, we'll have a great lineup of speakers talking about passive cooling and heating strategies and designs. We have several builders and architects that will be speaking on their case studies. As we go into the hot summer, folks can learn how to design homes without always the need for the use of a heat pump. And July 26th, we'll be learning more about incorporating biophilia in our next residential project. We'll have speakers from the Pacific Northwest talking about their case studies, as well as some really fun speakers from the Southwest that will also be presenting on their projects. So please join us for that. On August 23rd is the Northwest EcoBuilding Guild's annual picnic and networking event at Ravenna Park. We welcome you to join us for some brews and some snacks and just network with fellow green builders, architects, and designers throughout our region. And then lastly, September 27th, we'll have a all-electric homes focused green building educational event. So it should be a really great talk. I'd like to remind folks we are a nonprofit and a membership-based organization. So what you see today wouldn't be possible without our wonderful members. So please consider becoming a Northwest EcoBuilding Guild member. There is a ton of benefits. You have access to a huge library of previous webinars, trainings, workshops on code, as well as home electrification, materials, water conservation, heat pumps. So just a really great swath of information in our member-only content library. You'll also receive discounted pricing on all events. You'll be featured on our Green Pages directory, have access to technical expert forums, and of course, networking opportunities. I think I send our Green Pages directory out to potential homeowners and folks looking to contract with a green builder in the region about once a week. So it's really great exposure, and our Green Pages directory is used widely around our community. And that leads me to introducing tonight's speaker. I'd like to welcome Greg Lasher with TRC. In 2018, Greg joined TRC to work with builders, architects, and raters in new construction efficiency offerings. In 2019 and again in 2021, Greg managed code studies for the states of Oregon and Washington. Both studies have been published by the Northwest Energy Efficiency Alliance, also known as NEA, and shed light on the code development process, industry adjustment, and builders' reactions to code. Other clients of Greg's include Energy Trust of Oregon and Bonneville Power Administration, where he works with builders, suppliers, and raters. Prior to his work with TRC, Greg has worked in and out of the public sector for 25 years. Greg managed an energy efficiency company and acted as a building analyst in the existing homes market. Welcome, Greg. We're so excited to have you this evening, and thank you for joining tonight. And thank you all for joining tonight's event. So I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing so I can give my screen over to Greg. And Greg, I think I have made you a co-host, so that should provide you screen sharing abilities.
Great, thank you. Let me attempt to share my screen and we'll get going. Okay, can you see my screen?
Yes, it's not quite in presentation mode yet.
There we go.
There it is. Awesome. Perfect.
Okay. Thanks so much for that introduction. Yeah, again, my name is Greg Lasher. I have worked in this industry for 10 to 12 years, first as a contractor in existing homes, but for the last 5 years, I've worked in new construction. And my primary duty is to to work with builders and help them meet and exceed code. So I come at the Washington State Energy Code trying to see it as the builder would see it. I'm not a person that writes code or revises it. I read the code the same way builders do. And so I encourage you to read the code. We'll talk a little bit about that. Let's get going. So tonight I'm representing NEA. NEA is an alliance of 140 utilities in the Northwest area, Oregon, Washington, Idaho, and Montana. And we provide a lot of resources and education opportunities. It turns out all these utilities want to save energy. So that's a happy coincidence for me because I love to save energy as well. And so I love to do these kind of educational talks on energy code. Okay, so here's the agenda I've put together for tonight. I've got 42 slides and lots of content. I do want to hear a lot of questions. I will not be able to answer all of them, I'm sure. That's okay. I'm learning the code as well. I may be a little further beyond some of you, maybe not all of you, but I very much encourage questions. I may even have a special guest that could answer some technical questions that I may not be able to. So don't be afraid to ask questions. So my agenda is, let's talk about the timeline for implementation. Then I'm going to review the basic way that Washington State Energy Code is set up. If there's anybody that doesn't know anything about code, it's really important to understand that architecture. Even if you know code and you've built a lot of homes through it, it's a good idea to review the structure of it. Then we'll talk about fuel choices, fuel normalization, a very hot topic for the last 2 code cycles in Washington. Then I'll take on changes from the current code, which is called 2018 Washington State Energy Code, to the proposed, I will say, 2021 Washington State Energy Code, not implemented yet. Then I'll talk about some common pathways. In the introduction there, you heard that I've done a couple of code studies that were published, and I can talk about some of those results and give some insights for what's going on in previous code, the current code, and then we'll project out for the new code what I believe builders will be choosing. Then we'll do the details of the energy credit choices. This is the deepest dive I'll do, and we'll go through all 7 categories. And then we'll take on additions and remodels. The last section will be about resources. If you know, I'm not a builder, I'm not going to tell you how to build a home. I'm going to help you understand the code and point you to a lot of resources. Okay. Got to have this slide in here when we talk about code. And it's basically saying what I just said, which I'm not going to tell you how to build your homes. And I like to also put in here, read the code yourself. That's literally what I do, is I read the code. I go to other webinars and I try to learn about it. Code can be difficult to read, but you can use some of the references that I give throughout this presentation. I cite the code and you can go to it and read it yourself. And always check with your local permit office. I'd like to say that the implementation of code in any state I've worked in is 100% centralized and it's all the same, but there can be some local interpretations when you get down into the details. So always check with your local permit office. All right, here's the news. Today, the 2021 Washington State Energy Code was delayed. There was an 8-2 vote on the State Building Code Council. And they have decided to delay the implementation of the code for 120 days, which is the maximum. I'm understanding that they can delay it. And this is brought about based on the lawsuit stemming from the Berkeley decision in the Ninth Circuit Court. This has to do with the gas ban in Berkeley. I'm not going to get into the legal maneuvers going on here, but basically they are pulling the code and going back to the TAG meetings to hopefully correct some things that will protect the code from future lawsuits. So it looks like November will be when this is taking effect. From my perspective, that's not a bad thing. There's still some details that aren't really worked out. If you go to the SBCC website today and you look for a copy of the code, you'll see it's first printing. Well, it's actually 1.7 maybe first printing. It's gone up, come down, gone up, come down, and there's a few things that are undecided. I won't talk about those specifically tonight because they're still in flux, but there are a lot of things that can be worked out in that time period. Okay. All right, so like I said, it's always good to review the basic setup of the Washington State Energy Code. So let's do that now. And just to be clear, this is not how all states run their energy codes. So it is a bit unique. And Washington is one of the more progressive, not just in what they try to achieve with code, but also how they structure it. So the first thing to recognize in their what we call prescriptive minimums or base code, and these are things that all builders who pull permits for new homes would have to comply with. This is like R value in the wall, the attic, and overall air leakage control, window efficiency, all these things. And that's the base code. A lot of movement was made in the prescriptive minimums in this code cycle, the 2021. So we'll talk a lot about that tonight. And then builders need to advance to what's called the energy credit tables. And they need to obtain a certain number of energy credits based on the size of home that they plan to build. And you can see the three categories here: small, medium, and large. I'll go into a lot more detail on that as well. Those numbers, the credits actually went down in this code cycle, and we'll talk a little bit about that. Clearly, the medium category is by far the most popular category. Roughly 85% of homes in Washington fall into that category. And then builders go to the energy credit categories themselves. That did not change in this code cycle. The 7 that you see here are the 7 that are in the current 2018 Washington State Energy Code. The way the credit categories work is no builder is required to choose something in each category. They just need to meet the total number for the size of the home in order to get a permit to build, and also then to get occupancy once inspected. Okay, so let's talk a bit more about those size categories and how they've changed from the current code to the 2021. The small, medium, and large are, of course, single family new construction homes. And you see that all of the numbers have dropped. This is part of what is going into this code cycle, which is that the carbon emission credits have been recalculated. More items were pushed into the base code, so they actually have dropped the number of energy credits required. This is the beginning of my theory that this code cycle, although it's just as big and complex, and in some perspectives, it's actually simpler for builders. As long as a builder follows an all electric path, it's quite simplified. And I'll show you some examples of that as we move through this. So the other categories here, we have R2 multifamily, that stayed the same. And then we have a lot more definition on additions, which we'll talk more about. They split this category of underneath 1,500 square feet into 2 different sections. And we see some changes from 2018 to 2021. So more on that later. Okay, so that's the architecture or the structure of the code. We understand the energy credits and the size requirements, but overarching all of this is fuel choice and fuel normalization. So most energy codes are about saving energy. The Washington State Energy Code is about saving energy, but also reducing carbon. So that is dealt with through the fuel normalization table that was introduced for the first time in the current code cycle, 2018. And they have continued to use that to affect change in the market in this code cycle. So now I'm going to refer back to some trends on fuel choice. And I think you'll find this pretty interesting. When I did a code study a couple of years ago, we referred to a 2015 code study. And I'm first going to put up what they found. This is a study done in, I believe, 2016, 2017, and it was on the 2015 code cycle. And what they found was of the new homes in Washington, 79% of them were gas heated. The primary space heat was gas. And then for water heating, a similar but slightly different story, where 61% of the water heating fuel choices were gas, 37% were electric. Also, a lot of that electric was still resistance, not necessarily a whole lot of it was heat pump. So the 2018 code introduced the fuel normalization table, which requires builders to declare a fuel choice and either penalizes or encourages them with more energy credits. And this was the flip that we saw with the code cycle, that suddenly 88% of the homes in the current code cycle are 88% of them are electric, almost a flip completely of the story there for space heating. And for water heating, 83% of them are electric, and almost all of them are heat pump electric, so very efficient and electric. So this is the impact of the fuel normalization table. And you can see that I think they got the result that they wanted with the 2018 code, and they have moved on using this tool in the current code cycle. So this is the 2021 fuel normalization table, and I will review this in two different places. So I'm not going to probably answer all of your questions right now, but the secret behind all of this will become apparent as we go through all the slides. So the first thing we see is system type 1 is very similar to what was in 2018, and it says if you use a combustion fuel, you're going to be penalized -3. Well, that's only part of the story, because a gas heated home is only possible really with when there is no electrical grid available to the home. So that's an extremely unlikely scenario. So I have to put the off-grid only tag on that one. System type 2 is a new option in the fuel normalization table. This is the dual fuel option. And it basically says that your primary heat source needs to be a heat pump. And then in most cases, you can use a gas backup system under a certain temperature set point. I believe that is 35 degrees. So basically, the gas furnace is locked out until it gets that cold, and then it can be the source of heat in the home. And you can see the difference in the energy credits. They're just saying 0 energy credits, so not a penalty, not an encouragement. And then you advance to the energy credit tables. Electric resistance it has a -1 credit, also very unlikely. I'll show you why in a minute that would be chosen at all. And then we've got a couple of options here. 4, of course, is the most commonly, this is where they're leading you. They want you to do 4, right? Because they give you 1.5 credits. This is a heat pump. This is an air source heat pump or an air to water heat pump. And then number 5 is it's a heating system. It's a ductless heat pump in the primary zone with electric resistance backup, or a dwelling unit that is limited to 2,000 kilowatts, and that's essentially one good size wall cadet or 2 small ones. So that's not a lot of heat. So that's a pretty unlikely scenario, but anyway, this is your fuel normalization table for 2021. And like I said, we will revisit it in a few more slides. Okay, so now we're going to get into the changes in this code cycle. And this is the big news, of course, is space heating and water heating are now going to be required a heat pump. So how are they doing this? they simply say space heating shall be provided by a heat pump system. Yes, there's exceptions. They list 8 of them here. Most of these are pretty unlikely, but you can see my little arrow on number 7, and that's what I was referring to earlier. And it says here where there is no electric service available at the building site. That occurs to me that that's probably a pretty unlikely scenario. So this is a big part of this next code cycle, that for space heating, heat pump is required. The second is water heating. They say virtually the same thing. Heat pump, water heaters are required in all new homes. There's the exception here is a bit more likely. Dwelling units with no more than 1,000 square feet of conditioned floor area. I take that to mean ADUs or DADUs could fall under this. And of course, that can be an issue with a heat pump water heater because they're not meant to be completely outside in the weather. A garage is the best place for those, but a lot of smaller units don't have access to a garage. Putting them inside the thermal envelope is problematic. They make sound and they put off a bit of cold, so you'd have to duct them out. They're a little bit problematic, so there's an exception in here for that. Okay, so let's move on to prescriptive minimums, and we get into some of the more challenging parts of this code. On the left, I have the current Washington State Energy Code, what I'm calling prescriptive minimums or base code, and on the right, I have the 2021 base code. My arrows again are pointing out the differences. So let's talk first about ceiling R value. So these are your attics. We're moving from a 49 to an R60. That's a big change just right there. And my next slide will be breaking that out a bit more to talk about some details on that. And then the next one is what's going on with the walls. So what we see here is 20 plus 5 or 13 plus 10. This is requiring continuous insulation on the exterior, or what I would prefer to call outsolation. It's a little more direct of a term. As you know, if you have built in the current energy code, that there are options prescriptively in the envelope section for continuous insulation. That was not picked up very much. It's a pretty uncommon choice across the state of Washington. Now we've moved it into the base code. So the 20 plus 5 is, I see that as a 2x6 wall, R20 in the cavity, and R5 on the exterior. The 13 could be if you wanted to frame with 2x4s, I assume. You could do R13 in the cavity and then R10 on the exterior. There are options around this, and we'll cover that in a couple of slides. The last change here to the base code is the depth of the slab R value moved from 2 feet to 4 feet. That's something to note, but a pretty small change. Okay, so let's talk about attics. When I was reading the code, this is one of the places where I got a bit stuck, trying to understand what they're after here. King County recently published this on their website, and I found it really helpful. So I just stole it from them for this presentation. And we see 3 scenarios here. So with a traditional standard truss, you would do R60 on the main flats of the open attic, and that would taper down to the edge. If raised hill trusses are provided, then across the whole attic, they are requiring R49, which is an increase from R38 in the current code. The other scenario is you have vaulted ceilings on the upper floor of a home, and that has stayed the same. That cavity needs to be R38 all the way over to the edge. So I felt that was a pretty good way to look at what's going on with attics. Now let's talk a bit more about walls and outsolation. So as I mentioned before, there was an optional prescriptive path for energy credits in the current code. Now it's moved into the base code. And this, the picture here is a builder in Vancouver that I worked with. and he chose that pathway. So I went out and took a couple of photos. This is R5 on the exterior, very simplistic version of it, nothing super advanced here. Most builders will choose a product like this, which is a rigid foam board, but it can be other materials, cork, or rock wool, mineral wool. So they just need to have a stated R value that's equivalent to the path that you're doing. So if a 2x6 wall, you would need R5 on the exterior. There is another way to do it though. You can do an alternative calculation. This is one of the things that's not completely finished in the code. We believe the U value calculations are a bit off, but you could do a different choice if outsolation is just too mind-blowing for you. There are other ways around it. You can hit the same U value by doing, this is just a suggestion, but you could do a staggered stud wall, which would be a higher R value, and you have the thermally broken part of the wall there, and you could combine that with maybe triple pane windows. There's a lot of affordable triple pane windows on the market now. You could also limit the number of windows in the structure. All of that can be put into a calculator. Our friends at Washington State University Energy Program have a calculator called the C3 that a builder or a rater could be hired to do these calculations for you. And if you can show this similar or better U value than the exterior insulation, you can go that route. Okay, this is kind of a catch-all slide of some other changes. These are just things that I picked up reading the code. There are others. I had a few on here that I wrote down, but then I couldn't find the reference for, so I pulled them off of here. So I have the reference numbers for all these things if you want to check them out. If you are a building analyst or a rater that does code testing, you would be happy to know that they've dropped the requirement for 8.5-foot ceilings all the way around. It's over to the standard ResNet way to calculate air changes in a home, where you do the actual ceiling height in the current code, or the new code coming. Another thing, so when a builder is declaring and building a home with all the ducts inside, there are exceptions where you might want to pop a return up in through an attic and over to a central hallway. Previously, that was 1% of the ductwork. Now that's limited to a number of linear feet, 10 linear feet of return or 5 of supply. And as I work with builders, I see this as a potential issue. A lot of very excellent build homes have a longer return going through an attic than that. And what it's going to do is you need to plan that air handler closet very closely to wherever you want to pop up and go over, maybe to a central hallway. You're only going to be limited to 10 linear feet. That is not very far when you're going up into an attic and back down. A little surprised to find there was no increase in the efficiency of gas fireplaces. They're holding that at 50%. And that's the CSA, the Canadian list of fireplaces. Apparently they know how to rate fireplaces and we don't. So we use the Canadian list for that. In the air sealing category, so air sealed electrical boxes are required on the envelope side of any wall. That needs to be something like a NEMA OS4. You can look at that code citation and you might understand it a bit better than I do, but essentially these are better air sealed electrical boxes. This is one of the ways that buildings leak conditioned air. So they're just putting that into the requirements for all homes. The overall air leakage control used to be 5 ACH 50. It's been moved down to 4 in single family. I know I haven't mentioned a lot of multifamily. I'm not a multifamily person, so I'm trying to learn it here a little bit. The rating for multifamily is 0.25 CFM per square foot. So that's interesting. 5 ACH 50 is really not that hard to hit for most builders. In fact, you could just go with modern materials and build a home and probably hit 5. 4 is going to have to use a little bit more deliberation on builders who don't pursue energy credits on this to hit the 4 ACH 50. Multifamily. So corridor buildings, that would be a multifamily structure where you enter the unit from the inside rather than an exterior entrance. Those are being reclassified as commercial, so they'll use the commercial code rather than the residential. The other multifamily homes have the choice. They can use either the commercial or the residential codes. This is a minor point really, but all water heaters need to be installed inside, except for the very, very popular heat pump water heater, which is going to beat this efficiency requirement. So this is if you don't have a heat pump water heater, which is pretty unlikely. It can't sit in the garage or outside or something. It's got to be inside the home where it's subject to less standby losses. A number of details on lighting for both interior and exterior. This is one you should look at in the code. I tried to summarize it here, but it's basically that dimmers or occupant sensors need to be on most switches interiorly to save some energy there. And then exterior, there's a number of control definitions, basically making sure that those shut off during the daytime. If you want to learn more about that, go to that citation there. Okay. So now I put together a section on basically how builders are using the code now, what's a common pathway, and then I'm going to project what I believe most builders will do. We may not have most builders on this call, but I think it's interesting to understand what the code is doing to look at the most popular ways. So I'm referencing here again, one of the reports that I worked on for NEA. We looked at 178 permits in the current code. And this was the most common pathway for a medium-sized home. A medium-sized home in the current code requires 6 energy credits. And this was the most common pathway. It was only 11% of the permits. So even the most popular pathway still was only 11%. That shows a lot of diversity. And I think that's an interesting thing if you study codes, is this code really does offer a lot of options and builders take advantage of that. Anyway, this is the most popular pathway. They first are declaring their fuel normalization, and that was a heat pump in the most common pathway. So they got 1 credit before they go to energy credit tables, and then 1.3 in the envelope category, which is a modest improvement on window and floor insulation for a half credit. Then the lowest air leakage control option was part of this most common pathway at 3 ACH 50, not requiring an HRV or ERV for another half credit. And then it was also the most common to take that heat pump and bump up the efficiency to an 11 HSPF for 1.5 energy credits. So we have here, just from the heat pump, we have the fuel normalization of 1 credit, and then the 11 HSPF, so 2.5 credits towards our 6 just from that one device. Then it was very common to deeply bury the ducts for half a credit, and then choose a heat pump water heater. Heat pump water heater in the current code is, of all the 27 choices, is the most popular choice by far for a full 2 credits, pretty popular, and that totaled 6 credits. So that's the most common pathway. Now I'm going to project what I believe with this code, what the most common pathway will be. And the first thing you see is it's simpler and there's less credits required. So heat pump, I believe, will be the #1 choice in the fuel normalization table, and you get a 1.5 credits for that. I think they will continue to increase the efficiency to 11, so you get another credit there. So that's 2.5 credits. You're halfway to 5. You're halfway to all your energy credits with 1 device. I think ducts inside will be a popular option for a half a credit, and then that heat pump water heater, which already is the most popular option, for 2, and you're done. So a medium-sized home, the most common size, needs 5, and I believe that's where we'll end up. Okay, gonna dive into the energy credit choices. and we'll get to the questions a little bit later. I'm not a great multitasker here, so I probably won't be able to monitor the chat. Plenty of time to talk once we get down to it. Okay, so let's go over the fuel normalization table again before we go through each of the 7 categories. And remember, this one is required, so builders have to declare something in here. All of the other options for energy credits are optional, as long as they meet all of the energy credits required by the size. So let's review it again. Let's look at that system type 1, which is combustion. It's really natural gas is the most popular option in there. It's off-grid only. We're going to use that exception, but you're going to be -3 in your energy credits. Number 2 is that dual fuel option. It's a heat pump with a gas or electric backup. And by electric backup, they don't mean the strip heater, which you can have a strip backup in a regular heat pump for system type 4. This is a different system here where there's again that lockout temperature for the gas or electric backup. That would give you 0 credits. Electric resistance only, but you must use an exception from that table, because remember, heat pumps are required for space heating, so you've got to use one of those exceptions in order to do that. And then system type 4 is heat pump. Again, I think that will be the most popular. And then primary ductless heat pump in the primary space with electric resistance backup. Okay, so let's say we make a choice there. Then we get into the energy credit categories themselves. So the first is always efficient envelope. And we see that there's less options than in the current code. And lots of things have changed in here. So on vertical fenestration, I'm already forgetting what it was before. I think this was 0.24 in the old code. Oh, there were 2 of them. That's right. There's 2.4 and then 2.0, I believe. And there's only one choice for Windows only option in the envelope category, 0.22 for half a credit. Interestingly, that is a really easy U value to hit with some affordable triple pane windows that are entering the market. And it also is exactly the U value for the new Energy Star window, which comes out in the fall, that designation. And then we see option 1.2, and this is basically a workup over what is in the current code 1.3, just adjusting the window and the floor R values to 0.25 and R38, so a modest improvement in the envelope. And again, you see then a 15% in the category, so you can use a UA calculator if you want to do it slightly different, get 15% better, and you can get that half credit, or you can prescriptively choose the vertical fenestration and the floor R value. And I'm summarizing when I say ... There's a few other details, particularly about the slabs. Almost all homes in Washington have a crawl space, so just taking the most common pathway here. And then 1.3 and 1.4 are some pretty advanced envelopes. Some of these are passive house level choices. So we've got clearly triple pane windows at 0.18, R60 advanced. So that's R60 all the way to the edge with a raised hill truss, and the floor being R38 or 22.5% for 1.3, and then 1.4 is even greater with what really changed here is the walls. So that is an R21 wall plus exterior continuous insulation at R12, and that's a 30% better envelope, and you get 1.5 credits for that. 1.2 will probably be the most popular choice in this category. Okay, air leakage control. So everybody has to do 4 ACH 50, and then you can choose to go beyond that for energy credits if you choose. They stepped up the stringency of this one because the first air leakage credits you can get are at 2 ACH 50. Also, as you notice, all of these options require an HRV or ERV. So if you go for air leakage control, you're putting in an HRV or ERV of various efficiencies. So 2 ACH 50 was not a really common pathway for this current code. I think this is going to be pretty challenging for a lot of production builders. There are a lot of ways to get there, either manually or with the use of aero barrier, which is a much more common option out there now. 2 is definitely obtainable. I've seen aero barrier get well below 1, but I have not seen them do 0.6 yet. Certainly possible, almost certainly though that is a more advanced builder at the passive house level that's detailing an exterior air barrier. But these are your options for air leakage control in the new code. Okay, this is the most complex and lengthy category. It's making your HVAC more efficient. And I'll try to review this. There's a lot of details to this, questions you may have on it. So let's take 3.1, that very unlikely scenario that you've got a gas furnace in the home. Then you can make it 95% efficient and get a credit. 3.2 is addressing the dual fuel option. And when that is a gas furnace, if you make it 95% efficient, that's your backup furnace in the dual fuel situation, you get a half a credit for that. 3.3 is a heat pump that you're pushing above the federal minimums to 9.5 HSPF. You get a half a credit for that. And then we come back to heat pumps in 3.6, but before we take a diversion here to ground source heat pumps, either closed loop, a 3.3 COP, or open loop for 3.6, you get 1.5 credits. In 3.5, you get a ductless heat pump in the main of at least 10 HSPF. You can add 1.5 credits for that. And then we have the other air source heat pump, again, very popular option in the current code cycle at 11 HSPF. One of the things to mention about 3.3 and 3.6 is that if you are outside of the Puget Sound area, you probably have a design temperature that is 23 degrees or less, and you need to make that a cold climate heat pump. So you can't put just an off-the-shelf heat pump. You need to choose a cold climate heat pump. These are obviously heat pumps that perform efficiently well down into the temperatures. They have ratings, excellent ratings down to say 0 degrees. So that you have to install a cold climate everywhere outside of basically the Puget Sound area. Okay, so going back to the table, 3.7, if you've got a ductless heat pump with no electric resistance in the home, so you're completely on a ductless heat pump system, and you make that 10 HSPF, you get 2 credits. That's a little higher because the next category is not available to you, and it's about the ductwork. So it's a ductless system, so they give you a little bit more credit there in this category. The air to water option, if you have a COP of 3.2 at 47 degrees, you can add a credit in this category. And then this is a new item here, an Energy Star thermostat added to 3.1 or 3.3, as long as they are a system that is a 1 or 2 speed. And I may have that wrong. I believe it's only you can add it to the 3.3. I'll make a note of that and we'll clarify that. I think this is just about option 3.3 here. Anyway, you cannot add it to a variable speed system. If you know a little bit about thermostats and heat pumps, which I know a little bit about, they don't play well and you lose a bit of efficiency because it sort of dumbs down the system. So if you have a 1 or 2 speed, there's some efficiency gains to putting an Energy Star thermostat on it, and they'll give you half a credit to combine with it. But you cannot do that if it's a variable system. Hopefully I didn't confuse my words there, and you can ask questions later. Okay, now this category is about where the ducts live. In the current code, you could either deeply bury or bring the HVAC system inside the thermal envelope, or otherwise called ducts inside. Deeply buried is no longer available. With the base code being what it is and all the other efficiencies, there's just not enough savings from the deeply buried to justify any credits or half credits. And the ducts inside only offers a half credit in this, but again, the total number required is less in this code cycle. So only one option in here. and that is to bring the ducts inside, which is really a design issue more than anything else. Okay, let's go to water heating. There's a few more options available here. Again, 5.4 is there for 2 credits. That's a heat pump water heater. That's tier 3 NEA list. That's, you know, almost you'd be hard pressed to find any other tiers on the market anymore. Tier 3's been around for quite a while. They're highly functional. Let's go to 5.3, and you can now supplement with some solar passive water heating. I'll call that preheating. Is typically how those systems work. You can get a half a credit for that. Then let's do 5.5 here. So a split system where the compressor is outside of a UEF of at least 2.9, you can get 2.5 credits. That's also similar to the current code cycle. So our 5.1 and 5.2 are drain hole water heat recovery has been around for, I guess, 3 cycles, but those can be combined with another option in this category. Compact water distribution is a new option here. It will get you half a credit, and this is a design problem, really, more than anything else, right? So it is fairly stringent. I'm reading that you can only have 16 ounces between in the lines, and that is a measured thing in order to get that credit. So look into the details of that if you're interested in it. Particularly on smaller units, this seems very possible as long as you're designing for comfort and efficiency. Okay. Renewable energy options, moderately popular in the current code. They are sort of doubling down on this. The calculation of is no different. What they've done here, though, is they've allowed half credits instead of just full credits accumulation. I understand that some jurisdictions were allowing that anyway, so they acknowledge that, and you can do this in half credit increments of 600 kilowatts of electric generation, and they raise the maximum from 3 energy credits in this category to 4.5. So a good size array can get you 4.5 credits. That's a pretty big option if you're going that route with your homes. So this is the last category, category 7, and it's about efficient appliances. Initially, this looked promising, like it might be more popular, but in the end, this needs a bit of interpretation. But the bugaboo here has always been the heat pump ventless dryer. They are awesome, but most people do not prefer them. So there was not a lot of usage of this category because of that, and we believe that it is still required in the current code. That's kind of our reading between the lines. It would be nice to have that clarified, but we believe a ventless dryer is still required, and you get a half a credit if you do all 4 of those. Okay, switching gears a little bit here, and that's all of our energy credit categories. I'm going to talk about additions and remodels. This is a bit new to me, and I know there was a question ahead of time. They wanted me to address this, so here we go. These are some changes. Some of these things may be restatements, but most of this here is changes to how they handle additions. So small additions under 150 square feet, no energy credits are required. Just the base code needs to be complied with. So if you do 150 square foot addition, which is about the size of the room I'm in here, it's like 12.5 by 12.5, right? Then you don't need to do energy credits for that addition. Just the base code needs to be paid attention to. When additions are over 150, the attic space, if there is an attic space above it, needs to conform to R402. So that's the space above, and that would the attic options that we had, R60 or the raised steel truss, these sorts of things, those would come into play for additions that are over 150 square feet. Okay, so if you do an addition and you're replacing the space heating or water heating, you do not have to comply with the heat pump requirement for those 2 devices, as long as the replacement does not exceed the capacity of the equipment being replaced. So like for like replacement, you don't have to move perhaps from a gas furnace to a heat pump, but if you expand the capacity of it, maybe because of that addition, you would have to switch to a heat pump. Okay. Air conditioners may be added so long as the heating system is not replaced. Again, that's acknowledging that a gas furnace could have a heat pump added, or sorry, an air conditioner added to it without requiring it just to be a heat pump. To me, that's a great opportunity to switch over to heat pump, but they do allow air conditioners to be added. Number of energy credits changed from 2018 to WSEC, but not much else changed. That's just a note there, R46.3, and then unaltered sections of the remodeled home do not have to comply with 2021. So the focus is just on the addition itself. You don't necessarily have to change the whole home in the unaltered section. Okay, so I'm going to do a quick review, talk about resources, and then we'll get to Q&A. So the significant changes, these are just sort of my notes of what I see as significant changes from 2018 to 2021. Heat pumps are now required in space heating and water heating in most cases. That should be a big takeaway. The number of energy credits for each size category is reduced, greatly simplifying Washington State Energy Code when a builders build all electric. So a bit easier between the two codes, less choices that have to be made if you go all electric. And then all homes, due to the increase of the base code, all homes are going to have more robust envelopes, air leakage control. So we're talking about R60 attics in most cases, outsolation or advanced walls. Raised steel trusses will probably be more common, and you got 40 ACH 50. So a lot of folks are worried about heat pumps being required. One of the things that's really going to mitigate those concerns is the envelopes themselves will be much more robust. I'm going to repeat that air leakage control category. They start at 2 ACH 50. 3 was very popular in the current code, and that's no longer a possibility. There's a lot of difference between 3 ACH 50 and 2 as far as how a home is built. And then all the air leakage control options require an HRV or ERV. That 8.5 foot ceiling rule has been repealed. Deeply buried ducts are no longer an option for energy credits. They are an option for just installing ductwork, but you will no longer get a half energy credit for it. And solar PV can now get up to 4.5 credits. This is a list of some of the significant new energy credits. Compact water distribution, look into that. Washington State Energy Program has some resources for that. Go to their website. I'm going to show you in resources here in just a second, but they've got some great calculations for that. Smart thermostats are new, but only for non-variable speed heat pumps. And then dual fuel systems is an option in the fuel normalization table. Electric heat pump is primary, and efficient combustion fuel furnace as a backup is probably the most common pathway. Okay, resources. Obviously, I'm going to talk about NEA. NEA's Better Built Northwest. There's a lot of great information on this website. If you haven't been there and you're thinking about what your options are for this code, please visit that. As you can see, we have on-demand courses, ducts inside, outsolation, lots of great videos to review. And so I would send you to the betterbuiltnorthwest.com website for that. Big shout out to my buddy Jonathan, who I think is maybe on the call tonight. He and his team are great at answering the detailed questions. I've been known to call these numbers myself. Also, they do great lunch and learns and code webinars. So those are all available through the WSU Energy Program site. And that takes me to the final slide here. These are my contact info. I'd love to communicate with you if you have any questions. And then I guess we'll just open it up for any Q&A.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Greg. And yes, during this Q&A session, we'll have it kind of more casual. Folks, feel free to turn on your camera and unmute yourself. I'll definitely try and cover the questions that were posted in the chat for Greg and others online that might be able to help answer these questions. So we'll start with the ones in the chat, and then we can open it up to everyone. And thank you so much, Greg. If you wouldn't mind, maybe just posting your contact info in the chat as well, so folks can easily copy and paste. Could be helpful for folks too, for any follow-up questions and to learn a little bit more about TRC.
Yeah.
Katya has a question. Sounds like, and you may have covered this, but could you provide the official link that the WSEC 2021 effective date has been pushed back? Maybe at a later time, Greg, you can just drop in the chat, and I'll try to pull that up as well.
I don't believe there is a link yet. It was mere hours ago that I witnessed the vote. So in fact, I went to the SBCC site to see if they had posted anything, and they have not. It still says July 1 is the effective date. So what they did today is they passed a motion to submit changes. It's all very legal and technical thing, but they're pushing it back to the tag, and an 8-2 vote seems to me to indicate that they really are serious about pushing it out 120 days to address some of those challenges from the lawsuit.
Wow, we heard it here first then. Thank you, Greg, for that update.
Yeah.
Awesome. We'll keep an eye out on that then. Leslie asks, are the occupant sensors required for single family residents?
For the lighting? I guess that the occupant sensors for the lighting is probably what the question is about. Yes, well, you have options, I believe. And that is one that I would just refer you to the code. It's lengthy. There's a lot of things to read through there. I believe the way it reads is dimmers or occupant sensors. Not every light switch has to have an occupant sensor. That's not what I read, but at least dimmers or occupant sensors. And there's another category that I couldn't quite summarize, and I've forgotten what it says. So there are at least 3 options for interior lighting for efficiency. Yeah.
Great, thank you. John Alexander asked, does the 2021 code address any embodied energy issues in any respect? Brent followed up with perhaps future code changes. Well, I'm curious of your thoughts on that.
I have that same question. I think that's a great question. No, this is all about operational carbon. It's dealt exclusively through the fuel normalization table, which is all about operational carbon that would be emitted through the heating and operation of the home. Embodied carbon could be a future topic for sure, but I don't know. That's a great question.
Rob Harrison asks, have there been any adjustments for the higher SHGC windows?
No, not that I'm aware of. The focus is almost exclusively on U value. And from what I know, SHGC tends to follow U value pretty closely. That's a good question, though. I didn't see an SHGC requirement. That doesn't mean it's not in there. That's a good question.
Leslie had asked if you had any idea why the air leakage credits for 1.5 ACH50 and 0.6 ACH50 are identical. If you could explain why.
If they are, that may be a mistake on my part. If the question is, so they're, yeah, I'll just go over it verbally here. So 2 ACH50 is a half a credit. 1.5 ACH50 is 1 credit. 0.6 ACH50 is 1.5 credit. If I had it different in the slide, I apologize. Each of those 3 are different.
Yeah, no worries. Great, we got some good discussion in the chat. Let's see here. You referred to additions, but what about large interior remodels where maybe the home is gutted down to the studs? Are there any changes in this area? This is from Dean Freeman.
That's a great question. That's a gray area for me that I can't address. I know that I live in Oregon, and I know there are certain advantages, or there have been advantages to gut remodels, avoiding some code options. I'm just not sure how that's handled in Washington. If someone else on the call knows, and I'd love to know the answer to that as well.
It's Jonathan on the line still.
If that's a chime to chime in, we're
There you
talking
go.
if we're
Thanks,
talking
Jonathan.
gut rehabs. There was a definition that was proposed for the 2021 code trying to define gut rehabs. It was shot down during the tag process. And so I think each jurisdiction still has their home rule thumb of when they trigger when you've hit your rehab. And it usually deals with a percentage of deconstruction of the project.
Great, thank you.
That makes sense. Awesome. Thanks, Jonathan, for joining. Andrew asked, what is the recommended pathway for a 500 to 1500 square foot addition to a home that has an existing gas heating system? It seems like we start at -3 credits. Is that accurate?
No, I think I'm still sharing my screen. So let's go back here. So if the capacity of the furnace, if it's being replaced and the capacity is not greater, you can keep that gas furnace. I think that's what the question is after. Did I answer the question there?
Andrew, did he answer your questions if you're still on? And we'll wait for Andrew to see if he has any follow-up questions. But yeah, thank you for bringing back up the slide, Greg, regarding additions and remodels. Emailed to me, I had a couple questions from our membership that I just wanted to make sure we touched on real quick. And Aaron Sauerhoff, who is also one of our board members, please feel free to chime in if I'm missing anything. But he posted a question via email this morning. If you could touch on kind of an interest in including US high performance natural builders that are building beyond passive house standards, where a heat pump, is there or will there be an interest in including like high performance natural builders that are building beyond passive house standards, where heat pump is not even necessary? Would that be included in future codes? He explains that sometimes it's like the only option is to select alternative heating system, and that would provide them then negative points? And then is there a way in which a pathway could be, or in the future code, is there a pathway through energy modeling where they can select no heating system required? And if so, where does the case of advanced masonry heating or small wood stoves come in as an extremely efficient or perhaps clean way to heat the entire building when ran only occasionally? And he just asked regarding kind of, the wood fuel, is code super anti-wood fueling, even when it can be cleanly burned? And Aaron, if you're still on, feel free to chime in if I got all your points.
Yeah, I'll start off, and then Jonathan, I'd love to know your thoughts on this. But a beyond a passive house or something close to it is going to have so many efficiencies beyond what we've discussed here tonight, that I think the UA calculator is going to be your friend, and there's a tremendous amount of energy credits that can probably be obtained through that. As far as the fuel normalization choice, that's a great question. I've pondered that as well. I don't get to work with passive house builders every day, so I've not had that question directly before. But I also would like to know I would assume wood fired or wood heated would fall under combustion heating, but Jonathan, can you speak to that?
Yeah, so it would fall into, if you're doing passive house level, you'd most likely slide most of your stuff underneath that option 3 there, right? You're just going to take the exemption on the really low load, or your option 5, I'm sorry, the really low load on the home, right?
Right.
Gives you half of a credit for a 2 kW load or less. Less could be 0. So you would just take the option 5.
Right.
The one thing that you would have a challenge with, which the average production builder would have a hard time doing, is proving the ability to maintain 68 degrees, which is the requirement of conditioned space. Now, a super geeky person probably could through interior loads and things like that, but your average person, this is, the average kind of looking at that wouldn't quite know how to navigate that path very easily. But I think that would be the path that you would use, right? Is that you can, as long as you can prove that you're maintaining 68 degrees in your building, then you have conditioned space.
That makes sense. Yeah. What about wood fired? How does the code deal with that? Is that system type 1 or what?
It is a burning fuel type, so it's a combustion system. If it's your primary source, right? But if it's not your primary heat source, then it's not an issue. But for these low load homes that they're speaking of here, I could see where that kind of loops back on itself, right?
Yeah, that's tricky because in a low load home, a fireplace would be, it could obtain primary heat source status, right?
Well, especially if you got really geeky and calculate all the internal loads and did put a heat source in, then yeah, that would be your primary heat source, right? But I guess, I mean, so it is an interesting conundrum.
Yeah, if I could chime in, thanks guys, thank you so much for talking about this. The challenge we run into is, and it's kind of hard to calculate all this out, even with advanced energy modeling, but it has to do with, the houses we design and build are they have a lot of thermal mass. And so we're typically a super high performance building, a small wood burning stove will burn the residents out. It'll just overheat the whole structure real quick. With a lot of thermal mass in the house, it slowly absorbs it in the walls and it kind of spreads it out, and then we'll re-radiate that heat over the next 24 hours or so. So we have a good case study about this that we built a few years ago, and it seems to work really well, but we had to we had to take the negative points as the alternative primary heating source. So it was a challenging situation, and it wound up costing the homeowner extra money for no reason. And just want to prevent a situation like this from happening again.
Yeah, that's an interesting conundrum. I don't believe there's any interest in the code addressing indoor air quality, but combustion devices also could be a particulate issue, particularly in a tight home. I don't think that's what's behind this, but you're right. The code's not really made for that kind of a home, and I do see your point.
Yeah, and on the particulate issue, it's important to note that the EPA, the new EPA certified, or in order to be an EPA certified wood burning stove, it has to be airtight, have an air intake from the outside. So there's no indoor air problems. We had an HRV in it, super airtight. I think we had 2 point something in the exchange, and so yeah, it works well, and it was super small, really clean burning.
I think if I remember correctly, a lot of folks are just putting strip kits on their systems, right? Like the universals and the Xanders and such, right? Aren't they just adding like some strip kits on the back with some temperature sensors to turn on, and like it's just a small amount will kick on to heat the difference of the unit? If that's all calculated out with manuals, that would classify you as number 5. And if that strip kit never kicks on, then so be it. It just never kicks on.
Yeah, we thought about that. One of the challenges with this house in particular was that they were showing that about 30% of the winter days had power outages. They were really far out there, rural. And so they really could not rely on electricity to be their primary heating source. So that's kind of another big question of mine, is how do we account for a lot of people in the state that it seems to be pretty, at least the perception is that it's dangerous to rely on heat, on electricity, when it's not that reliable sometimes for some people.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. Of course, there is the possibility of solar plus storage as a resilience factor, but that's also adding cost to the project, isn't it?
Yeah, it's accessibility and affordability problems, but yeah, and that's where we ran into this. Is a low budget thing,
Right.
we had to do simple, very cost effective solutions. So yeah, it's a conundrum. I appreciate you guys talking about this.
WSU does not provide consulting services of any sort. But if you were to do a manual calculation using your EFRV and the strip kit to distribute as your primary heat source, you're using electric resistive heat as your primary heat source. And you understand what I'm saying with this?
I think so.
So if you're really trying, and you really want to get that combustion fire in because you're in a situation where you believe that it's a good resiliency thing. If you were to design the ERV system and do a full manual calculation to include the strip kit and prove it's underneath that 2 kWh, that is your primary heating system for the home, and it proves through distribution. This is how you're going to prove that you're going to maintain 68 degrees in all the extremities. Right, you've done a manual calculation. The HVAC now becomes, or the distribution air, your ERV, your ventilation. Sorry, it was a late day. I've been driving a lot. I apologize. Your ventilation system will now also double as your distribution system. So if you do a proper manual calculation and size your HRV and ERV appropriately for this and put that strip kit on the backside, you've proven through your manual calculations you have proper distribution and proper heat maintaining for the requirement load for your home, which you're saying is super small, right? And if it never needs it, the strip kit never comes on, but that is your primary heat and distribution source.
That is brilliant. I so appreciate you getting into the details on that. Thank you.
And again, WSU does not do consulting. So if you leave here, you implement that, you're on your own. All right.
Totally.
Okay.
I understand.
Jonathan, we have a follow-up question. Brent, I noticed you unmuted yourself. Feel free to ask your off-grid question.
Yes. So when you mean off-grid, so is it legal in this state to build a house and not have it connected to the grid?
The energy code does not regulate where you get your fuel source from. Typically, when you purchase a home as a builder, when I used to buy lots, I would sign agreements to sign that I would purchase into and pay for my portion of the city services that were attached to my lot. And I would sign up to those services. So when you sign that agreement, then no, you can't go off grid. You've agreed to hook to their services and pay for those services.
Oh, okay. So when you guys say off grid only, where maybe you said an example already, but where would that actually happen?
Not all lots come pre-attached to city services.
Right. So if you bought a lot, you would have to sign that document saying you're going to connect it to the grid?
It depends with the lot. See, this is like, I used to have a broker's license. And so I always tell everybody to make sure you read through all your stuff. There's legal documentations.
Yeah.
And when you do purchase or don't purchase a property, there are rights and things that can come along with those properties. So always review to ensure that the title of the property that you get what you're looking for, and you know whether or not those city service LIDs are already assigned to your property or not. But I mean, so for instance, my buddy's a farmer. He's not connected to any city grid services. He doesn't have anything signed for any of it. He is completely off the grid, all 8.5 crop circles. So it's amazing, cool stuff because he's a greenie weenie like me. I love him, but that's a different conversation.
Yeah.
That's completely fine. He could use gas as his primary system in the way he goes. He hasn't signed anything or brought any city services that he has to pay for. So it's all about the legality of what you're signing elsewhere. It has nothing to do with specifically the energy codes or the IRC codes or anything. It has to do with what you're agreeing with your those that are providing the services to you.
Yeah, the only reason I ask is because I grew up in Florida, and you're not allowed to buy anything or build anything anywhere in Florida and not have it connected to the grid. And there's even like people who tried to do that and they just were using solar panels and all sorts of stuff. And they all like, they got arrested and had the property taken away. So I was like, I haven't really seen that in person yet. So that's why I was asking if there's situations like that out here.
Can you guys hear me?
John, yeah, we can hear you.
So I am doing a project for a client out on Waldron Island, one of the northernmost islands, tiny little island on San Juan's, all off grid. Everybody's off grid. So are you saying that if I design a building for them, hopefully, that it would have to comply with the energy code, even though it's completely off grid? So it seems like the energy code won't apply to that situation, just theoretically. Is that misunderstanding? Like, I designed a house for them. It's completely off grid. It's completely solar powered, uses their batteries, whatever. It just seems like I shouldn't have to comply with any sort of R value code or anything. Right?
No, they still want the house to be efficient.
No,
Maybe you're building like a log cabin. I know a guy that built log cabins, but he's having a little bit of trouble right now with the code because he was following different code rules. He had his architect write the governor and stuff because of the R values of the wood.
No, I understand that. I mean, I want to do a high efficiency house. It's just,
That's a good
just
question,
feel-
John. Let's see
it's
if
just
Greg,
like,
let's see if
yeah.
Greg and Jonathan Jones have the question to that. And I'd love to get to some of the other questions in the chat. This is really great questions on off-grid. I don't want to focus our discussion too much on off-grid because they are so rare. And we've got a lot of builders and architects on the line that are doing a lot of Seattle projects. But yeah, I'm curious, Greg and Jonathan, do you have any information regarding John's question of an off-grid home? Do they need to pursue the Washington State Energy Code if they are not connecting to a grid system?
I think that's a great question for the local building jurisdiction. I'm pretty sure there's a jurisdiction office that wants to regulate what goes on in that construction process, and that's a great question for them.
I can contact them and follow up. It's just a hypothetical that just occurred to me. I did have another question about the UA calculation. Can you talk more about how to do that? So, for example, say we're doing a remodel or something, and I don't want to put, the full, like, I want one side of the wall to align with the other side of the wall. So I don't want to put exterior insulation on that because I want it to flush out. So I can't put 5 inches or R5 on the outside. Can I just do a simple UA calculation, just like the total wall area, so that I could put, like, say, additional insulation on another side of the wall and it would calc out to be the same? Or do I have to do the whole building, all the windows, the roof, everything?
Well, I'll set this up, and it's Jonathan's been working hard on that calculator, so I'll let him take the details. But there's more than, you're right, that would be a problem with the exterior insulation just on the addition that's going to screw up your siding installation. So there are other ways to do it with windows or other things. But Jonathan, do you have some details for him?
Oops, I do. I hit the wrong button. I apologize there. So it needs to be split in half though, right? So the UA calculator for new construction and a UA calculator for, like, your addition. And to answer your question, in new construction, you would be required to perform a total UA. Well, in both situations, you're required to perform a total building UA calculation. The single UA component was stricken out of the 2021 code. The language has the strikeout straight through it. There is the R value compilation that you may do called the R value alternative. And there's the total U value alternative, but the single item U value alternative was removed. But in an existing world, you may use the UA calculator to improve the unit next to you as well. So, like, if you're swapping a garage addition and you have the existing home, and for whatever reason you're having issues with the garage, you can upgrade the existing home as well. This does do different things and open different rule sets for you, as well as maybe close a couple, such as if you use the exemption to use the UA calculator to make the whole building comply for your addition, then it pushes you out of any envelope credits.
Oh, there he is.
As with any codes, when you use an exemption, you can't later claim credit for it. So if you take this exemption to trade off that insulation on the outside, you're not going to do a UA improvement to get like maybe a 5% bump for windows or whatever. You get what I'm saying? But you could increase the windows and the walls on the rest of the unit to help the addition comply. But the new rule set says that you can't do that to the attic space. If it has an adjoining attic space, then you're just required to fill that attic space automatically now.
Okay.
As equal.
Okay.
Thank
All right.
you.
Thank you.
Jeff Aslan, I noticed you unmuted yourself. I just wanted to make sure I covered any questions you had. Did you have anything to add regarding anything discussed earlier or the off-grid? Sorry to call you out too if you didn't have anything to add, no worries.
I didn't, sorry. I was able to join the presentation late, so sorry I was unmuted.
No, welcome. We are in a kind of deep dive discussion on multiple questions and topics of the Washington State Energy Code. Greg provided such a great overview, and a recording of the event will be made available to everyone who signed up via Eventbrite. And I do want to get into some other questions that have just come in the chat. Looks like Santos asked, the verbiage looks slightly different on 7.1 credit, if we want to turn to that one, ventless dryers for 2021. When a builder has all Energy Star appliances, they want to pursue this credit. However, the hold up is the ventless dryer. The verbiage is different here for a dryer. If the dryer can come up against the exhaust with no ducting, can this credit be achieved?
Well, this is the part that we're kind of in need of an interpretation. Jonathan and I have gone back and forth about this and brought some other folks in. In the end, it doesn't look like there's a way around the ventless heat pump dryer, but this is where we need an official interpretation. And this might be also an instance where if they don't clarify this in the final printing, that this is a question I think I would ask the local jurisdiction office before I planned my permit submission. What it says for the dryer is look it up on the list of, I believe it's 2022 Energy Star list of dryers. And when you go there, the heat pump dryer seems to be the one that will comply with this. And that's my reading of it. Jonathan, do you have anything different to say?
So funny enough, I was scrolling as you were talking about it to make sure that the newest edition still had the same language in it, and it does. It says the dryer ducts and exterior dryer vent caps are not permitted to be installed in the dwelling unit. So the very last sentence in 7.1 on the chart of the 406.3 says the ducts, the dryer duct has to be removed.
Yep.
Great, thank you, Greg. Thank you, Jonathan. Santos, did that help answer your question? Feel free to give a thumbs up, or if more is needed to chime in. I'm gonna also peruse my email. I've received a couple of questions that came in as well. Making sure I cover those that were sent in this morning.
Hi, sorry, this is Santos. The reason why I'm asking about that specific credit is because I feel like every single builder I know will go for this credit if they can make the dryer work, because every builder is doing the dishwasher, refrigerator, washing machine, all Energy Star. So the issue is the dryer. Sorry for this background music. I'm out to eat with my wife right now, so I apologize.
Yeah, I hear you on that. You know, when you talk about ventless, that's a different issue than heat pump. Heat pump, of course, uses less energy than the resistance dryers that we all have. The ventless is about not depressurizing the home, which is less of an option if it's an all electric home. So I think those are the two things they're going after. And it doesn't seem like they backed off on it in this code cycle at this point. But I hear what you're saying. This would be a very popular option. But it also has to save enough energy in order to get that half credit. Each half credit in the energy credit tables has to save, I think it's 600 kilowatts per half credit. So I think that's the details that they're dealing with there.
Great. Thank you so much, Greg. Yeah, and thank you all for joining. I didn't see actually the emails that came in on my end were already covered. So what I'll do now is just open it up to the floor. If folks want to share their video and or unmute themselves, please feel free. I'll have the event open several more minutes here. If you have any questions, we have some awesome code experts on the line here. Please feel free to freely ask questions. You can also post them in the chat. Let us know if you have any more questions. And Greg, do you have any questions for builders or architects, perhaps, that you might be needing for your research or analysis? Anything you would like to ask to our audience, feel free to do so.
Yeah, well, I've only presented my projection for the most common pathway in one audience, and I did get positive feedback that it looked like it was most likely to be the choice. So if anybody has anything to let me know about as far as that goes, I'd be interested in knowing. There's one, I'm going through the chat now. There was a question about, is there any effort to require rain screens as part of the wall system? Not to my knowledge. Jonathan, you might want to, you were in on those tag discussions. So if there is anything about rain screens, that would be interesting.
Actually, the continuous installation made it through the whole tag process from the very first meeting, and it was never brought up again, interesting enough. It was adopted during the mashup process, and I don't think a lot of folks were paying attention and realized it was included in the code. And so there wasn't a very long, lengthy discussion on it at the tags. There was no proposal to remove it from the mashup process, and so there was no discussion on it really. I know that the life cycle cost analysis was done nationally when they adopted it in the 2021 codes nationally. Does that help? Am I answering the question where that came from? Oh, so there wasn't much discussion on rain screens, but the deal is you're going to look for permeability. And according to the guide, one of my recent new hires, he was saying that the specifications, 1/8 of an inch thick is the requirement for some of these rain screens for the drainage purposes to function properly. I'm not the drain screen expert, I'd have to go grab the ANSI standard and kind of crack this out, but I've been talking about using rain screens as part of the shearing process as well, for adding additional shear to your buildings when you're doing them. And I do recommend them, especially if you're going to use a non-porous or a non-permeable exterior insulation.
Can I jump in here? I was the one that asked the question about rain screens.
Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, very good. I believe Oregon requires rain screens, and as we build more and more energy efficient buildings, they become more vulnerable to moisture issues, specifically condensation, as well as rain coming in places where we haven't caulked properly, or there's some kind of problems with the siding or something going on there. And rain screens are a pretty inexpensive way to greatly increase the chance of not having moisture problems in the shell of a building, the shell of a wall over the long term. And I think it's an important step. I think having rigid insulation on the outside is a fantastic step, but rain screen is a step that goes along with that very well and isn't really covered by rigid insulation. Having the minimum of 1/8 inch thick, I would agree, is not a bad thing to do. We commonly do them more like 1/2 inch or 3/4 of an inch, but 1/8 inch can really have a major effect. It can be quite effective in making a big difference.
Yeah, no, I've been hammering home. Like if you're going to put the like a rigid material on the exterior and you're going to continue to use one of the non-smart interior vapor retarders, I believe it's required to have a rain screen on the exterior. Again, I'm not an IRC expert, but I have to dive back into it to look that up. My understanding is if you do have that vapor barrier on the interior, which we're a cold climate, you're pretty much required to have a rain screen on the exterior.
That's great. Thank you.
So this is Jeff. I did have a quick question for Greg and Jonathan, if you guys wanted to chime in, but curious how you guys are kind of seeing the evolution of enforcement with this next code cycle with, you know, kind of an increasingly technical code. Are you seeing, you know, jurisdictions having to, you know, kind of get their staff more schooled on building science and all the permutations of this code package? And kind of how do you see just the enforcement side of things evolving with this next code cycle?
Yeah, I think we both have something to say about that. There is a study by NEA that should be published soon, where they took the current code cycle, the 2018 WSEC, and they attempted to look at this piece of compliance. So what they're doing is they're comparing declared choices for WSEC at the point of being permitted to build, and then they're going into occupied homes and looking to see if the items are there. You'll just have to wait for the public report, but it's not a great number, and that should be coming out soon from NEA. And I know Jonathan is doing a lot of training on building code officials. So Jonathan, what do you have to say about that?
You know, as far as the building officials go, all I can say is like everybody in the industry, just have patience. I was up in Linwood, Washington. There was 160 people in that classroom. And during my lunch break, I had a conversation with a few folks in the front row, and I was surprised to find out how many people in my class, which was labeled intermediate, had folks who had less than 3 months experience as inspectors. So the silver tsunami has had a real impact on the inspecting industry, the jurisdictions. And then I'm trying to avoid the political answer, but somewhere in COVID, there was a big exodus amongst the industry too, right? And then so if you add that together with the folks who've actually hit the real retirement stage and are retiring, a lot of the knowledge base is just gone. You got a whole lot of new inspectors. I'm getting questions on some old building science things we hashed out years ago. So you can tell there's a lot of new folks that are coming back in. All of them are taking classes. They're all begging for more classes. There's about 6 of us running around the state trying to educate, and everybody I hear is having pretty much sold out classrooms. So they are definitely trying to learn too, but I imagine like everybody, it's a bit of drinking like a fire hose kind of scenario for them.
Thanks, that's helpful.
Any more questions for our speakers this evening? And I appreciate the discussion in the chat. Thank you so much for those who who have chimed in. Dean, I appreciate your comment. And yes, John, you know, that might be a good question for Greg and Jonathan, you know, with your experience with this code cycle and the code committee, how could we as builders and architects best influence the next code revision cycle to include considerations in regards to embodied energy? What are your recommendations for folks?
Yeah, so I went to IBS this year, and I heard a great speech that was about code, and I know that doesn't sound exciting, but I thought it was like Glenn Mathewson is a code instructor, and he said about 14 times in 20 minutes, if you want to participate in code, there are no restrictions on it at the IRC level. So at the I codes, anyone can write a proposal, anyone can write a revision, you can contribute to the next code cycle. So that option is open to anyone. And he also does this great speech about how codes are actually representative of our time, and you can think about them through time and how they have changed in with the culture that in the issues that are going on in our society. So I think that's certainly one option that's open to everybody. And then I would say that I view mostly Oregon and Washington's code cycle for creating it and revising it and implementing it. And I would say the Washington side is far more open than the Oregon side. So it's better. Even in today's meeting I was in, when they were voting to delay the code, there was an opportunity for public comment, and there certainly were people speaking up on both sides of the issue to delay or not to delay. And so there's that opportunity as well. Jonathan, do you have anything to add about how to participate in code and get your thoughts into what could be considered?
Yeah, no, that's kind of the problem that we're having, right? And we just talked about how one, there was an ask for a delay for education and some errata cleanup, right, for our current code. The beauty of the democratic process is that anybody can participate. And there have been some grumblings about tightening that process up that I have heard, and I really firmly disagree with it, because you don't have to be a very well educated person to have a great idea. And if you're not great with English, or even math, trying to fill out a code proposal is very difficult. And Washington has been very open with helping with that. Amongst all the other states that I have ever listened to or jumped in on, Washington has been very open and democratic in this process. The end result is you get some language sometimes from the national code, some language from the Washington code, and you get this little kind of mixture that causes a couple hiccups, kind of like what our current code is currently seeing. But that is a result of a very beautiful democratic process.
Thank you so much for that. Appreciate those comments. Great. Wonderful. We're just about shy of 8:15, and I want to be cognizant of folks' evening and time. Maybe if anyone has, one or two more questions, and then we'll wrap up. But in the meantime, thank you, Greg and Jonathan, for this information. Really appreciate you, Jonathan, for joining this evening. Really grateful for the expertise and insight you bring. And Greg, this presentation was just fantastic. Thank you so much for the insight in this. And just a little bit more information. Again, the link to this recording will be made available about a week out from today for everyone, all speakers, of course. I'll send you all a recording of this event as well. And then as well as for all participants who registered through Eventbrite and Northwest EcoBuilding Guild members. Let me see if there's any more. Ashley asked, is there a portal to compare and contrast building? Oh, that's a good question. If there was a portal to compare and contrast building codes by state, for example, Washington versus Oregon, has TRC done anything like this, Greg? That would be really helpful for you. Just curious.
Not that I'm aware of. I don't know of I would probably spend too much time there if there was a portal like that to compare. I think we tend to focus on the local states, and we're pretty much unaware. Mostly my exposure to other state codes is when I go to national conferences and listen to things that other states are experiencing. And there are several states that don't have state codes. Even Colorado does not have a state code. They have completely what's called home rule. That doesn't mean they don't have good codes, but they're all local. So it's kind of interesting, the mixture of responses from the states as to what they adopt.
Wonderful. Thank you, Greg. Appreciate it. Awesome. Well, thanks all. I think for now I'm sure more questions will come up. So Greg, I'll be sure to share your contact information. And Jonathan, are you okay with me sharing your contact information for questions? Or would that be okay?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Just not the personal cell phone, please. Yeah, any of the WSU stuff, email wise or phone, all of it comes to me one way or another. So absolutely share any of it. It works.
Awesome. That's what I figured. Great. Thank you all so much for joining this evening. Appreciate your time. Greg, that was a wonderful presentation. And Jonathan, again, thank you so much. Yeah, and if y'all have any last minute comments, questions, I'll stick around for just another minute or two as folks leave. But yeah, open to take any last minute questions or feedback. Appreciate you all. Thanks. Great. Yeah, thanks, Greg. You can stop sharing your screen if you'd like.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And that helps me kind of find my controls.
There we go.
Perfect. Yeah, great. Wonderful. Well, thanks again, Greg. Thanks again, Jonathan. And I hope you both have a wonderful evening. Enjoy the nice weather.
Yeah. Thanks
Yeah,
so much.
thank you guys. It was really, really helpful, inspiring. God, thanks for all the hard work you guys are doing.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Nina, for helping organize this. Yeah.
No problem.
Yeah, you. Thank you.
And John Novak, if you're still on the phone, let's have an off-grid education event one of these days. I think that would be a lot of fun. Awesome. Thanks all. Have a good evening.